Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd Family part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. I know it's early on a Sunday morning on the East Coast and it's late Saturday night everywhere else, but I wanted to come on here live because I enjoy reading your comments, especially during college football season and in the videos that I'm going to discuss college football. So if you jump on here live, feel free to leave a comment down below. And while you're here, make sure you like the video, give the video a thumbs up, and share the video on all social media platforms. I know Kansas State and Colorado are still playing. That game right now is about midway through the third quarter, but I've got a big, busy Sunday morning at church coming up in the morning, so I'm probably going to be up around 7:30. So about the time Kansas State and Colorado ends, I need to go straight to bed. So I'm just going to watch the rest of the game in the background while I'm doing this video. That way, as soon as the video is over, I can finish the game and go to bed. Otherwise, it's going to be about 2 o'clock in the morning when I do the video when the game ends, and I need to be laying down about that time. But I wanted to come on here and talk some college football. Any thoughts on any other games from Friday night or any of the games that happened yesterday on into Sunday morning on the East Coast? Please feel free to let me know. And they always say there's nothing like college football because you just never know what's going to happen. Just as soon as you think you've got it all figured out, something always happens to make you say, nope, I don't know what I thought I knew. I'm still learning, and that's the joy of college football. For example, this year when Kentucky played South Carolina, I mean, you couldn't have possibly looked any worse than Kentucky looked. If you tried to look worse than they looked, you couldn't have done it. I mean, they looked absolutely awful in that game. Hi, Judith. Glad to have you here. Just talking some college football. So, since Kentucky looked so bad in that game against South Carolina, everybody thought, man, Kentucky's awful. They might be terrible. And since then, they've played pretty good football. Hey, SK, glad to have you here. Now, what exactly happened in that game? I don't know, but Kentucky looked so bad in that game, you could have told me they were the worst team in Power 4 football, and I would have believed you. But since then, they've looked pretty good. You know, the second half against Clemson, Georgia looked really good on offense. But since that game, their offense just hasn't looked the same. I mean, it's been okay. It ain't been bad, but it hasn't been what you would have thought it would be. SK, we are discussing college football. Any thoughts on college football? I would love to get them, but I'm trying to mainly focus on college football in this video because it is a Saturday night slash Sunday morning, and I know people love college football. But that's just a couple of examples from, games where you see certain things and you think, man, just like in that Georgia game against Clemson, Clemson looked awful. Their defense looked okay. By midway third quarter, it looked like their defense just said, you know what, we give up. If our offense is not going to score, we're not going to go out here and kill ourselves for no reason. And Clemson looked so bad on offense against Georgia, you'd have thought, man, this team's awful. But ever since that game, they've had a top 5 offense in America. Now, what happened against Georgia, I don't know. But in that game, they looked absolutely hideous. But back to Friday night, let's start there. Arizona State defeated Utah 27-19. And Utah's funny because Kyle Whittingham has always been talked about as being probably one of the most, if not the most, underrated coach in America? I don't know. That is a good question, GP Pen, that I cannot answer. But now, the last couple of years, people have talked about Utah being a top 10 team, maybe being a top 10 team, and now all of a sudden they're not performing. So it's almost like Kyle Whittingham is a better coach when people don't talk about him and don't expect things from his team. And all of a sudden, when things get expected of them, they don't look as good. In a game that would make you scratch your head, Northwestern beat Maryland 37-10. I mean, that game was over 5 minutes into it. UNLV defeated Utah State 50-34. Now on to the game that started around lunchtime yesterday on the East Coast. Alabama, speaking of teams you can't figure out, defeated South Carolina 27-25 earlier in the year, even against teams like South Florida. Alabama just did not look good. And then in the first half against Georgia, they looked absolutely dominant on both sides of the ball. But ever since that first half against Georgia, they have looked absolutely pitiful. The only thing that saved their butts in that game yesterday was the fact that South Carolina can't throw the ball. Lenore Sellers just can't throw. So when Alabama got that huge lead, then the Gamecocks had to rely on Lenore Sellers throwing the ball, and he can't throw. And then they almost came back late in the game, recovered an onside kick, but it was so late in the game you had to again rely on Lenore Sellers throwing the ball. And he'll probably get better eventually somewhere down the road, but as of right now, if the Gamecocks have to throw the ball, they're in trouble. Lenore Sellers just can't throw. Clemson dominated Wake Forest. Going into the game, there was only 3 teams in America that had not given up a point in the first quarter this year, and Clemson was one of those teams until yesterday. Wake Forest scored a touchdown first quarter. End of one, it was Wake 7, Clemson nothing. And then after that, it was all Clemson the rest of the way. As a matter of fact, Wake Forest put their backup quarterback in about midway third quarter. They done decided, okay, we're beat. So again, the Clemson offense continues to look better every week. I'm glad Garrett Riley is finally showing the world what he can do. Iowa had their best offensive outburst of the season, at least against competent competition. They defeat Washington 40-16. Wisconsin started the year with Miami transfer quarterback Tyler Van Dyke as their quarterback. He got hurt against Alabama, and ever since he got hurt, their offense looks better. They destroy Rutgers 42-7. Georgia Tech defeats North Carolina 41-34. And it's funny because Georgia Tech almost can't throw the ball at all. So you pretty much know when you play the Yellow Jackets, they're going to run the ball, but yet they still do it. North Carolina tied it up late in the game, 34-34, and then Tech came right back with, I believe, a 68-yard touchdown run with about 15 seconds to go in the game. So Georgia Tech is now 5-2 on the season, so they've definitely came a long way in a year and a half under Brent Key. Buffalo defeats Toledo 30-15. Army wins again. They defeat UAB 44-10. Nevada 42. Oregon State 37. Oregon State's one of only 3 current Pac-12 teams, so they're having to play anybody they can play to fill up a 12-game schedule. Texas State all over Arkansas State 41-9. And don't be surprised if you start hearing Texas State's head coach's name mentioned when some jobs start to come open, because Texas State's offense looks impressive. Washington State, speaking of Pac-12 teams with no schedule, they defeat Fresno State 25-17. Memphis wins again. They defeat South Florida 21-3. San Diego State defeated Wyoming 27-24. Cincinnati defeats Central Florida 19-13. Louisville comes from behind and defeats Virginia 24-20 in a game that's probably most likely the game of the day, or at least tied for the game of the day, but nobody will talk about it because it's two teams that really nobody cares about. But Illinois defeated Purdue 50-49, and when the game started in the first half, it looked like it was going to be all Illinois, and then Purdue started making a comeback. And Illinois is ranked in the polls, but they're towards the bottom of the rankings, but they're still ranked. But Purdue made a great comeback and came up 1 point short. Pittsburgh is 6-0 for the first time in, I guess, 50 years. They defeat California 17-15. Tennessee defeated Florida 23-17. And I don't know what's happened to Tennessee's offense, but all of a sudden they just can't throw the ball. I don't know if they don't have confidence in the offensive line or if they don't have confidence in Nico, but they all of a sudden just have basically virtually no passing game at all. BYU wins again. We started the day on Saturday with only 9 undefeated teams in the Power 4. And, of course, there's less than that now. But BYU is one of those teams. They win again with Kalani Sitake as their head coach. 1 year, Sitake is the most loved coach in America. And the next year, he should be fired. But they defeat Arizona 41-19. Georgia defeated the other Bulldogs of Mississippi State 41-31. Mississippi State scored more points than I thought they would, but they might be the worst team in the Power 4. If not, they're at least in the bottom 5. They are absolutely hideous. Penn State comes from way behind to defeat USC 33-30. Oregon defeats Ohio State 32-31. What an incredible football game. I know the Ohio State fans are going to start saying, for Ryan Day, if not this year, win, because, in my opinion, them losing to Michigan here recently has cost them at least one national championship. But this year, Michigan is awful. They have no business losing to Michigan next month, but their excuse has been, hey, we can't beat Michigan. But this year, Michigan's bad. But Ohio State's talent, they've got pretty much $20 million or more in NIL players. So, they've paid for the talent, and they have it. So, if Ryan Day don't get one this year, you're going to have Buckeye fans saying, you know what, Ryan Day wins a lot. We're a top 5 team, but he can't win the games that matter. But in case you missed the ending of it, there was 10 seconds to go in the game. Ohio State ran a play. If there was a penalty on Oregon's defense, it was only a 5-yard penalty. So Ohio State goes from the Oregon 43 to the Oregon 38, and they said that right around the 30-yard line was field goal range. So the Buckeyes only needed about 8 yards. But there was 10 seconds when the ball got snapped, and the clock went down to 6 seconds. And a lot of times on penalties, depending on, when they're called, how they're called, they'll put the time back on the clock. I don't know if Will Howard thought that happened or if he just lost track of time, but the time didn't go back on the clock. There was 6 seconds to go. He got the ball, and the middle of the field was wide open. He ran, I think, down to the Oregon 25, and he slid, but the clock was at 0. So I don't know if he just lost track of time or if he thought those 4 seconds got put back on the clock. So the game ended with Will Howard sliding in the middle of the field. So Oregon hangs on for a 32-31 win. Texas all over Oklahoma, 34-3. Oklahoma just can't score. They benched their starting quarterback when the season started, Jackson Arnold, and it's done them no good. They can't score. I mean, they couldn't score on the field by themselves. Colorado State defeated San Jose State 31-24. Syracuse defeated NC State 24-17. Iowa State wins again. They defeat West Virginia 28-16, and Iowa State was one of the 9 undefeated Power 4 teams going into the day yesterday. And then Vanderbilt beat Kentucky 20-13. You know, back opening weekend, Vanderbilt beat Virginia Tech, and everybody thought it was a big upset. But turns out it really was not an upset because the Hokies aren't as good as they were thought to be, and Vanderbilt is much better than they were thought to be. So Vandy beating the Hokies turns out, after all, was not an upset at all. Again, I know that Kansas State and Colorado are currently playing. They're now late third quarter. Kansas State leads 21-14. But I wanted to come on here and talk some college football. Hard to believe we're already pretty much halfway through the season as far as games being played. Most teams now have played 6 of their 12 games. So we are right at the halfway point. And I'll continue to say that if Ashton Jeanty of Boise State does not win the Heisman this year, you might as well just get rid of that award because it is pointless. He's by far the best player in America. It's not even close. He right now is on track to break Barry Sanders' all-time record for most rushing yards in a season that he's held since 1988. So we're on the backside now of 30 years, getting close to 40. And Ashton Jeanty, in about 3 of Boise State's games this year, has only played one half of football. So no telling how many yards he would get if he ended up playing all game, every game. But when you're blowing teams out, you're not going to keep your starters in the entire game. Of course, coming up later on today on the East Coast, tomorrow, if you're watching this anywhere else, the new college football AP poll will come out. We'll talk about that coming up sometime later on in the week. Well, let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. Volkswagen is bringing back the Beetle as an electric car. They're going to call it the Lightning Bug. And that does it for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.